I'm not sure if this is a skinwalker or spirit. I live in Southern California. About a week ago, I was staying at my boyfriend's house. He lives with his mom and stepdad, but they were gone on vacation, and we were watching The Three Dogs. The first night, everything was fine. Dogs slept good in the master bedroom, while we were down the hall in my boyfriend's bedroom. Second night, we crawled in bed around 9 to watch a movie, and the dogs were restless and kept barking and growling in the kitchen. I had to get up multiple times to tell them to stop and go to bed. Around 10:30, I was about to fall asleep. I got a call from my sister who drove out to the desert to camp with her boyfriend, but she was panicking. She said while they were unpacking their stuff, they heard some kind of crackling, almost like laughter, but not totally human sounding, followed by a very deep, almost fake sounding howl. She said similar to hyena laughter, but deep. There are no hyenas in San Diego County. Coyotes maybe, but that's pretty recognizable. She asked her boyfriend if he heard the howl, and he said yes. They estimated it was within 200 feet of them. Both of them got so freaked out knowing it wasn't a coyote, they packed their shit and got in the truck. Driving away, they were looking around with a flashlight and saw nothing. No other campsites, no other people anywhere near them, no coyotes. I calmed her down on the phone, and they ended up moving to a different area closer to a ranger station and other people. I immediately thought Skinwalker because I read posts about them before, but I didn't want to put that idea in their head at the moment, and I ended up going back to sleep. About 2 hours later, I woke up to one of the dogs whining and scratching at our bedroom door. I started to get out of bed, and I hear what sounded like a car alarm, just like a horn going off. I looked out the window, and it wasn't our cars, so I opened the door to let the dog in, and the sound got louder. I realized it was coming from somewhere in the house. I woke up my boyfriend, and we both walked down the hallway and saw all the dogs standing outside the master's bedroom. We walked inside and realized it was his mom's alarm going off at 12:33 in the morning. We were trying to figure out how to turn it off, but none of the buttons were working. We pressed every single one until he finally unplugged it and shut it off. I told him how creepy it was the alarm would just go off out of nowhere. He thought maybe his mom accidentally set the alarm before she left and didn't realize it was for AM instead of PM. I thought about it for a second, but then realized that this is the type of alarm clock you usually set the night before, and we had been there by ourselves for 2 nights already, and it hadn't gone off yet. If his mom had set it, it would have done it the previous night, not 2 days later. He kind of just brushed it off as glitching, and we turned and went to go back to bed. We told the dogs to go to bed, but they were still standing outside the door. None of them wanted to come in and lay on their beds. We ended up going back to our room, and they all followed us and laid down on the floor. I told my boyfriend how I was freaked out about the dogs being antsy and then getting that call from my sister, and then the alarm clock going off and the dogs following us back into the bedroom instead of going back to sleep on their beds in the master bedroom. He said it was kind of weird, but everything's fine, which didn't make me feel any better. The only thing that kept going through my mind was there's something in the house. I can feel it, and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my sister and I told her what happened, and she said that she had the same feeling that night, that something was near us and she could just feel it. She said she doesn't think it was a coincidence either. Something was fucking with her because she told me about it. It came and fucked with me. I believe that too. I also believe that something was luring us out of the room with the alarm clock and the dogs knew it. That's why they followed us back to the room and stayed with us the rest of the night. I don't know for sure if it was a skinwalker, but we were both in the area that has multiple Native American reservations close by. Whatever it was trying to scare us, and it worked. Number 2. So growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. He was a pretty awesome dude. He was born in Hungary and fought against Nazi Germany during World War II. After the war, he came to the United States and married my grandmother. Together, they started a family. Out of their 5 kids, my mom was their middle child. Grandpa was awesome. He would yell at people and curse them in a language none of us could understand, but you could just tell he terrified people. It sounded so harsh and rapid like machine gun fire. It never failed to leave people speechless, but he was pretty chill usually. At Christmas and other holidays, Grandpa was always super generous. Other times he would take me into his workroom and show me stuff he's collected over the years. On one particular afternoon, I was 12 years old. It was a sunny, warm day in April. Grandma was out doing shopping for my cousin's birthday party to be held there later that week, so I got to stay behind with Grandpapa, as we called him. Will, he said in that crisp, polished, distinctly old world tone. You know, the one that automatically made one sound more sophisticated and impressive. This I took from my homeland right before the Reds took it over. Right from my own hometown, right by the mountains. I can still remember the craftsman who made it, a good man named Dmitri. It was a tiny statue of an angel in clear white marble. The statue felt cold in my hands. I handed it back to my grandfather. Then he showed me an officer's uniform that he took from an old Nazi bunker, complete with sidearm that he kept locked in his safe. I asked grandfather how much it was worth. He just smiled widely and said, "We'll find out if need be." Whenever he leaned in close to me, I could smell the distinct smell of peppermint and leather that I still associate with him. "Will, my boy, I will tell you something that neither your cousins nor anyone else knows," he said in that hushed tone. He directed me to sit in the sofa opposite of his wooden desk chair. I felt the soft leather couch sink down as I eagerly crouched down to listen to him. Now, I fought in the army for many years. I saw what evil lurks within men's heart. Stuff that history is recorded and your generation learns about in school. But there's only one time in my life that I ever felt true fear. "What was it, Grandpa?" "That was about 30 years ago. Your grandmother had just given birth to your Aunt Annabelle. I had to go out of town on business, back when I worked for the Channing Steel Corporation. Well, I will never forget that day, August 7, 1974. He took out a handkerchief from his shirt pocket and wiped his brow. My colleague Richardson and I had gone out to get something to eat, some good barbecue. We ate the best ribs I ever had in my life. We were staying at the Burden Hotel in Virginia, and we had just finished meeting with a client that day in Richmond. Everything had been going fine. After dinner, we drove back to our hotel, about a half an hour outside of the city. It was about 11 o'clock at night. We'd gotten off the interstate when there we saw it. "What was it, Grandpa?" "There was this big swamp next to us, and then right outside of the entrance of it was a woman." "Really?" "Yep, just standing there. A real looker, too. Looked to be in her 20s. Blonde hair, long legs, the whole deal." "Did she need a ride?" "She had her hand out like a hitchhiker, but there was something about her that made me feel uneasy." "What was it?" "Something about her expression. An attractive woman in the middle of the woods, at night, waiting for a ride from total strangers. Now, it may have been back in the day, but even then you were cautious. She didn't come across as desperate, afraid, or anything remotely like that. It was a look on her face. She seemed so carefree about being alone at night, by the swamp." "Well, what happened next?" "She flagged down our car. Richardson was torn about what to do. He was driving, as he usually did on the trips. I told him to keep going. He looked like he wanted to stop for her, but he always deferred to me for the decisions. Because you're the best and everyone knows it." He gave a smiling nod and continued. "We drove on much faster than we had been. That was when we noticed there was a car on the side of the road, a 1967 Mustang, a red one. It looked like it had been attacked by an animal, claw marks up and down it, the tires flat and the windows shattered. It was about 30 feet behind where the woman stood." "Wow." Wow was right. That car put me over the edge, and I told Richardson to get us out of there like yesterday. Good old Richie, he delivered as always. "What did the woman do?" "She changed. You could feel the change in the air around you. It was a cold chill around us. As we passed her, she began to sprint to catch up to us. I had not, and to this day, never seen a human being run like that. And I've seen people run from gunfire and tanks. I will never forget the way she moved. It was so predatory, like a rabid animal. I half expected her to get down on all four, but she didn't. She just faded away into the night behind us. Richardson was freaked out as I was. He had been doing 85 on the road. That drive away seemed like the longest stretch of road ever, but we finally got back to the hotel and crashed in our room." "So what did you do?" "Called the authorities and told them what happened. I'm not sure if they believed us, but they said they'd check it out. They said when they got to that stretch of the road, there was no car, no nothing. So we did our part, and it was time for us to go back home. That's scary, Grandpa. I know. At least when I was in the service, I knew what I was up against. Whoever that or it was, there's no way to know what you were up against. Thanks for the story, Grandpa. I won't tell anyone. I appreciate that, dear boy, but there is one last thing, the worst part. What's that? After we got back to the hotel room and called the cops, we went to bed, or at least we tried to. When I was finally ready to nod off, I heard what sounded like movement outside of the room. We were on the first floor, but had the window curtains closed. At first, I thought it was some passerby until I heard what I swear was a beast growling on the other side of the door. And I say beast because I knew it wasn't a dog or anything. Then it was immediately followed by harsh knocking on the door. The kind of knocking that means business. The way someone with something to say knocks. When Grandpa said this, I got the chills, worse than I already had already. Did you see who it was or anything? Absolutely not. Richardson and I refused to even look or get out of bed for that matter. Then I heard something else. It was very faint, but it sounded like a child laughing, or something passing as a child. For that laugh had not the faintest trace of warmth or joy in it. Neither of us made a sound. We just lay there until the morning and we couldn't get out fast enough. Somehow I managed to doze off a little bit after 5 a.m., and the sun had begun to emerge. When the sun was finally up and the others could be heard going about their business, we opened the door. On it, there were scratch marks. I knew it was no animal because there were 5 scratches and they were all spaced a bit apart. We left immediately at checkout, and as soon as we got on the highway, we made a pact to never return there again. Grandpa said something in Hungarian under his breath and went on to talk about something else, but I'll never forget that story or the look on his face. Number 3. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell it. It made me question everything, my faith, my eyes, and my sanity. I've decided it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on, or at least that's what I hope. I recently moved westward to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I'm a devout Christian, and never once before this had I believed that there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019 for heaven's sake. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town, about 5 or 6 miles into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, enjoy ourselves, and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way, something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and I ignored my ever so looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. I'm a huge nature lover and always felt safe in the confines of the forest. I felt in control, at ease, but not tonight. It may sound cliche, but I'll be damned if I didn't feel like someone or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me why I felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot we usually go to, therefore I was not familiar with it, nor were my friends. We were coming out for the same reasons we were in December, for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather the firewood. I didn't mind. It was my chance to survey and explore the area around us, so it wouldn't be too bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light being cast from the small bonfire I was gathering more fuel for. In the faint glow of the fire trees, I caught a glimpse of something dart behind a tall pine. I asked backwards to my friend if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around in this spot. My query was only met with silence from them as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall shadowy figure fixated behind the trees. I could faintly make out it had moved in a slight bobbing motion, like a buoy upon a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was a prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even crack a joke, but I was mortified when I realized I couldn't speak. Something inside of me prevented me from making any noise, and my heart raced. As it swiftly came, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back onto the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I do so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line of what I saw, but it was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never dared step away from the beams of the bonfire. As I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remember what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I don't know why they wouldn't listen to me, even if I spoke out, so I ignored the guttural feelings, prayed for the best, and walked on. I hadn't been drinking that much either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for hurting them back home when the night was over. However, to calm my nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilling in the ice chest. It was a Christmas party after all, and it worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet towards a big rock resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen doing my business. I was not even far enough away from the fire to not be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woods. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember calling out to him, telling him to give me a minute before I finished. I zipped up and turned to walk around the rock where I heard him wander to. I don't know what it was, but it sure as all heaven above and hell below was not Corbin. It took me a minute for my woozy mind to put together and stop walking towards it. I'm thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 to 7 feet. Its eyes burned like fire. It moved from a dog-like four-limbed position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark, slender shape with an inhuman sheen. I began to sob violently. My mind ran in panic circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and began to pray. This monster, to my petrified brain, had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it could be impossible. I did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loudly with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror, and with all my strength I could muster, lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs would let me. I fell a few times, I think in sheer panic. I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly, knowing that thing was near me. When I returned in a panic craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt, and tears, I managed to wheeze out what happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in the moment that I had a small seizure because everything else was a blur. I remembered going back to the truck and leaving. I remember waking up the next day receiving a multitude of texts saying I was either stupid or crazy, or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last I saw of this thing before I made my frenzied flee, when it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared mentioning the event because I was worried about being mocked, or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed me and told me it was a skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. Next time I might not be so lucky. He didn't have to tell me twice. I know this all sounds crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either. But you don't have to. All you have to know is for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we're not alone. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. Number 4. I don't get out very often, and this was a rare occasion. I was out drinking my ass off at the local pub in a near town of about 2,000 people. My two drinking buddies and I were at the bar until about 1:30, and none of us were fit to drive ourselves home. And our genius idea was, all three of us walked to the nearest park and crashed on the benches, because we all live out in the countryside. We walk about 5 blocks to the park at the edge of town. For insight, this park is surrounded by trees to the north and east and fields to the south and west. There were 3 benches to sleep on, but I got the one closest to the woods. The bench was extremely uncomfortable. It felt like when you get knocked down to the ground and feel the wind get knocked out of you whenever you turn to get into a more comfortable position. Then at around 2 a.m., I checked my phone to see the time and decided to get up for a smoke. I didn't want to wake my buddies from the light of the cigarette or sound of the lighter, so I wandered about 20 yards into the woods. That's when I saw it. A tall and skinny man, around 7 foot if I had to guess, but it looked no more than 120 pounds. His arms are very long for a man his size. They reach past his knees. In fact, it had 4 joints in the arm, enabling to bend his arm in unnatural poses. His unnaturally long arms were reaching up and grasping the tree branches above. He stood very still, only moving his fingers slightly, as if tapping the tree branches using echolocation to find its prey. But his unnatural figure is not what scared me the most. It was his face. Well, it wasn't his face per se. It was mine. Except there was something off. It didn't exactly seem like my face. Maybe it was a lack of eyes or the snarl it had pulled its mouth into. I screamed. Well, I tried to at least, but no sound came out except for a pitiful squeak. It craned its neck towards me, but it didn't see me, though. Either it was too dark or it was blind or both. Now, I'm actually glad I couldn't scream because if I had, it might have heard me then. I ran back to my bench I'd been sleeping on and checked my phone. It was 2 a.m. again. How did time go backwards? Oh well, no time to think about that. I looked over to my friend's bench. He wasn't there. Neither of my other friends were either. I was still half drunk, but I sobered up just a little by the shock of everything that just happened. The realization of my friends going missing led me to call 911. I dialed the number and it rang for a few seconds before it said the number you dialed cannot be reached. Please try again. It was so loud, I didn't know my phone could play something that loud. And to my horror, I heard the footsteps coming from the forest. I booked it. I got out of the park and into the town, but I ended up back in the park. I had been running and suddenly I ran back to the park like history had repeated itself. While in the park again, I saw the thing sitting on the bench that I had previously been sleeping on, but for some reason my buddies were sleeping on the benches again. Overloaded with glee, I ran over, but as soon as I got close, they disappeared. God damn it, this has to be a dream, I shouted. Realizing what I had just done, I dreaded what was about to happen. That thing, whatever it was, looked over and hobbled over to me, and I was unable to move. It picked me up by the neck and wandered back into the forest. It walked and dropped me in a small hole filled with half-eaten bodies and other bodies, including my friends' lifeless bodies. There were children, adults, people. I knew some of them, but they all had the same snarl and lack of eyes. The thing leaned over and whispered in the most chilling voice I could imagine. It sounded like thousands of children screaming all at once, forming almost an unidentifiable voice. It's not a dream.